All right, welcome
Okay.
everyone.
So, Steve, I got a question. What is the relationship between OSS sustainability and common life enumeration? These two working groups, how are we feeding each other? Are we doing the same work? Do we interfeed with it? What does that look like? What's that relationship?
I think they complement each other. I'll let Salva kind of speak to what his vision is for sustainability. But in my mind, sustainability is really focused heavily on open source software and providing some visibility into the consumers of that software on how they can contribute back so that we can have sustainable open source in the future. CLE, or the Common Life Cycle Enumeration, is essentially a specification in development that is targeted at any kind of component. It could be a hardware component, it could be a commercial piece of software, it could be open source. Essentially, what it tries to do is capture the major life cycle events that occur in that software's life cycle. For example, um, the software was renamed from one thing to another, or end of life, end of support, end of guaranteed support. These are all different types of milestones that can occur. And right now, the group is considering that to be more of a time series specification. Um, so I think there's going to be some similarities, but ultimately these two specs, in my mind, actually complement one another. Salva, do
Okay.
you want to kind of break down kind of how you kind of view sustainability?
Yeah. Um, my primary focus is on the open source projects themselves. And while the software that they produce over time does have a timeline that the CLE probably applies to, the projects themselves also have a life cycle events that we should be aware of. And some of them we already know quite well. And we have names for them like the bus factor is zero. For example, there's no maintainer left because they are life came in their way, or they got kids, or whatever reason they have for not maintaining their component anymore. And the things that I'm looking for when it comes to the sustainability of these projects is to find ways for these projects to communicate any changes that are about to happen, or if their project maintainer or owner isn't available, that trusted party in the ecosystem that they usually publish to can give such signals on their behalf. Say, for example, if somebody is literally run over by a bus, somebody else will have to say, this project is now needing of a maintainership, and is open for adoption or something like that. But there's at least one more thing which is super important when we open this can of worms, and that is not to just look at what state a project potentially can get into, or they can report they are in, but also on finding ways to communicate how to avoid getting into the bad states. Usually that means reducing risk of burnout, or finding ways for recruiting new types of help or assistance in a project. It could be looking for a co-maintainer, it could be looking for a community manager, or somebody to triage tickets on GitHub. It could be anything. And the reason I think it makes sense to put this kind of information in an SBOM specifically is that these documents, this will be read downstream by the users. Users and businesses who care not only about the security, but also about the predictability and future use of a component that they depend on. So if they receive a signal that they need help with something to ensure the viability of the project or the sustainability of the project, for some kind of help that this business is capable of providing, then this is a type of beneficial information that is a win for all parties involved. And when the business does a risk analysis of the things they do, make an assessment of whether or not there are some parts that they need to keep an eye on. Knowing that the project has all the necessary help to actually be responsive for vulnerabilities, for example, or anything else that might come in their way. That's a super useful type of information to have, especially if it's an important component. So this is when I'm focusing on the open source components. It's strictly not true. I'm also thinking of the whole ecosystem and the users, and primarily to help the communication between these, because right now, as things are in 2024, there's a lot of users out there, but they're silent. They are in practice bystanders. And from the other perspective, from the open source perspective, the developers, they're often looked at as in less favorable terms, like the words like leeches
Fire?
and
Okay.
yeah, like this, like people who just expect to get something for free and not give anything back, like parasites. I've heard a lot of words over beer and a few doses of frustration, and this is not a beneficial situation for anybody. And I think anybody who's been involved in these communities are aware of this. So let's do something about that. That's what I'm hoping we can do with this for a year.
And I'm glad you brought up the whole thing that it's not just OSS, because I think commercial will be a subset of open source. I think that, I mean, there's many more nuanced states, I think, with an open source project than there are with a commercially available product. And so that's my interest in this as well, is both, is because obviously open source is used a lot in products, as well as proprietary code bases that are used there. And we need insights into both of them. So more so nuanced for the open source than for the proprietary. And the proprietary side of things, probably all I need is something like an end of support date would be nice to know. The level of support we're going to get from this, from whoever you are, whether you're open source or proprietary. I mean, I've talked to open source moderators and got much better support than I've gotten out of proprietary in some cases. It just depends, okay? You just don't know, you can't assume. So I think that would be very useful. I'm glad to hear you say that you're thinking more larger than OSS, because I think it's really inclusive of everything.
Yeah, thanks for bringing this in also from your perspective. This is a little bit my own personal opinion here, so I cannot cite anyone when it comes to this. But for me, the ecosystem and the open source, even just the open source in general as a phenomenon, it is mostly motivated by internal motivations, like curiosity and caring for a specific topic, or engagement in the community, or anything else. So in a sense, when a commercial user is going to interact with their dependencies, their dependent communities. The communities they depend on, literally, we could call them open source colleagues even, since it's a public work that's being developed. There's good ways and bad ways to go about this. The usual way of thinking in a commercial sense, that you pay for something and get service back, doesn't really apply in the open source world in the same way as it does with in a purely commercial ecosystem. So what I'm hoping for here also is to help for us together to find ways to help expose these types of cultural expectations we have, so we can build bridges here. And that means we talk about how to communicate in some ways. Like, it doesn't mean we would give them a guide, but we can have in the specification some fields that say something about expected level of support. Like, this package is casually maintained. That is a thing out there. And so in a sense, expectation management is useful, but at the same time, having a date connected to a support period might be difficult. I would imagine there are cases where this is the right thing to do, but I can count more situations where somebody who has published something based on their own volunteer efforts, that they don't want to make a promise about something being available and supported. And very often the support you get from many communities is good because people care. It's literally a product of somebody's caring. Their heart is into it. They care about their users to help people. And I have people who I would love to call friends, colleagues, certainly in the open source community, who have asked, why do you do that? You take care of like literally several hundred packages that are in use by millions out there, and probably hundreds of thousands of businesses, and affects many millions of people. And you don't get paid for it. And she said, I like to help people. That's it. That was enough for her. Now, if they at some point would get an irate commercial user who has their neck on the online for being cut off or something, if they have a sword of Damocles hanging over them and say, I'll get fired unless you help me, then this is not a constructive situation.
And totally agree. And it's like, if there's one thing about it, I mean, right now I've been working with a project called Capella out of Eclipse. It's a threat modeling platform. That's another topic. And I love it because of the level of passion that people bring to it. When you're commercial, you're doing it because you get a paycheck, and you don't have passion. And in fact, if you started out with passion, it's quickly crushed out of you. All right, you wind up hating what you're doing, and it's like that old saying of "do what you love and you never work a day in your life." That saying, that's total BS, because no, it'll crush it out of it. You won't love whatever it is if you're doing it every day. You're doing this for the paycheck. That's just the way it is. So completely agree with you. It's that level of passion that makes the difference. And that's where giving back bothers me, because I don't see, I mean, besides money, if you're talking about contributing hours, I don't want somebody who's not passionate coming back into some of these projects and ruining them, okay, for whatever that looks like. And so I think the passion is a necessary element on the open source side.
That is a fascinating discussion to have. And my take on this has one aspect added to it, and that is around tasks that are necessary to do, but that it's difficult to find volunteers for, because it might be that it's boring. So at the CPAN security group where I'm working at, we are looking at tasks. We're trying to literally make a budget, because we are looking for funding. And we know that these tasks, some of it is super interesting and we'd love to spend our free time on working it, but a lot of it is literally like soul-killing work. But it's still important. So we are trying to rank the tasks not only after importance, but also about how boring it is.
Sexiness,
Yeah, and so we have a vote on how boring we find that task is, and then we can make a priority list based on boringness plus importance, and we fund the stuff that is most important and too boring first. So that's our way of trying to resolve the passion conundrum.
So there's one of our attributes to include: a boring factor.
Well, it's for me. It's up to the maintainer of any given project. If they don't have no care about user interface design or marketing, but they really need it in order for their project to get more users and to get more adoption and thereby a better chance of recruiting more people, then they can raise their hand and say, please help me with user interface design and marketing. I don't like this stuff. But I need it. And if you have somebody who likes doing that, send them my way.
Nice.
I think we got a new person here.
Yeah,
Sean
just joined. He's a colleague. So Sean, you can.
Yeah, I'm just another person from the Chaos Project that Salve got interested in this. I was in another meeting before this, so I thought I'd just drop in and see what it's about.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
Success criteria, I think for me for this project, I'm looking at it from, I guess maybe an OWASP dependency track lens. So if we just focus on the adoption just of that one tool, right? You've got at least 20,000 organizations that use this. As of last year around this time, you had 500 million components represented in CycloneDX every single month that were being analyzed for known vulnerabilities. It's probably 2 or 3 times that rate by now. We'd have to look at the numbers. But with that type of adoption, with that many components represented, it would be really interesting for me to be able to have features in dependency track that would highlight very basic things that would allow organizations to create policy that, is this component older than a year or 2, and is it without a maintainer? Does this component have a vulnerability and, they haven't released something in God knows how long, or again, lack of maintainer? Is this, of all the tens of thousands of components that we have in our organization, these are the ones that we use on the business critical things, and we use these groups of things. Maybe we should think about maybe contributing back to those open source projects in some way. So having some features that we can have policy, as well as features that we can provide visibility on, not just the list of things that they use. I mean, a spreadsheet can do that. That's not, impressive. What would be impressive is just kind of visualizing who actually is part of your supply chain, right? Bubble graphs, whatever we want to do. That way organizations can actually think about contributing back to some of these to these maintainers and foundations, right? So in my mind, success criteria is kind of leveraging the existing adoption that we have to kind of highlight the importance of OSS sustainability.
I think a real interesting opportunity there is what the CRA has done, the EU CRA, which I'm only just getting into that giant nightmare. But I've been putting it off.
Happy to share my findings if you're interested, because I've spent 1.5 years on this now.
Oh, anything you can send me to help, I will take, man. I will take. But one of the things seems to be, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, is that if you have a project that isn't a maintainer, but I've used it in a product, I now become the de facto maintainer. Is that?
That's a difference. That is not true. When it comes to the Cyber Resilience Act, the manufacturers who this law apply to, they have liability, or they take responsibility for the security of their whole product, including any dependency that they are actually using. So in a sense, they have a duty to do their due diligence and checking if everything is okay. And as part of that duty, they need to do the assessments and to check against vulnerability databases and have an idea if their components have a functioning open source community around them, stuff like that. But when it comes to taking over projects, that's something that usually you do with the community that the project has or it's enveloping.
I think I misspoke when I said that. It means you're now responsible for it. You're in the first position seat.
Yes,
you're not taking over monitoring, but of the community version of it. But you've now owned your instance of it. And where I think that has value for open source is now in a long-term support, an LTS model, where these manufacturers who are going through and creating products and are using these components do not want to absorb that extra. Do not, and that's worth money to them. To say, no, I can pay somebody here and have long-term support for this here and set up a model and a relationship. I think that has huge potential there simply because of the CRA.
Yes, I completely agree. And the CRA specifically puts into place a system with something called the Open Source Software Steward, a non-profit organization that is supposed to do vulnerability assessments and ensure that the components that are published through them live up to the expectations that their users or manufacturers have. So in a sense, this is also an opening for businesses who are in that position you speak of, that they don't want to take upon themselves the whole responsibility, to outsource some of it upstream where it kind of belongs, sort of. But this has to be done in conjunction with the maintainers, and the maintainers, they're not in it for the money. So we'll have to find a way to that's a super interesting discussion which we cannot solve here. But if the maintainers see that they can get something out of it in the form of help through the communication that they do through an SBOM document, then we can at least make things happen in a constructive way. So for me, the Cyber Resilience Act is super relevant because it is gives the whole. It creates an audience for the SBOMs that is incredibly useful, and if that audience gets the right message on how to interact with open source communities and what they need, figure out what they need in a super easy to understand way through the data that they get from their upstream providers, and ta-da, we have a meaningful way to create sustainability for the projects. Certainly in Europe.
Looks like we got one new joiner, George. Hi, can you introduce yourself real quick?
I'm Georg Blink. I'm from the Chaos community, and I work at Bitergia.
Very good. Well, welcome. So you wanna Salva, you wanna maybe I posted the link to the use cases and requirements doc. That should probably be like the first order of business that we start working on, just kind of scoping what it is that we want to do, and figure out like what is viable out of that list, and actually start creating the requirements.
I have seen it. Could you share the link in the chat here so others also can take a look? Or you already did so?
Yeah, but for the folks that joined later, they probably didn't see it.
Right.
I don't think you see the chat history, so I just posted it again.
I've added like the absolutely minimum, just a rough idea of what I've been telling you guys at this meeting here in a condensed matter. This is, there we have it. And I made that picture because thanks to Christopher having a good discussion on the Slack a while back. So the 4 points I made there I think there might be one or two more, so I'll need some help thinking around that. I'm having trouble with my browser here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, sometimes my browser starts eating CPU and freezes up. So this is a first attempt at figuring out something on what to do. And for me, I'm trying with those 4 points. I'm trying to explore the outer frame, like what should we care about, like this is both related to not doing okay. It's for finding ways to avoid work that we don't need to do. Like, for example, anything that the common life cycle enumeration should take care of, we shouldn't step on. But then there's also some new things I'm wondering. And for example, when it comes to identifying project states, I'm not sure that's the best word for it, by the way. So if you know a better word that describes if they are responsive or shut down, or if the project is done or whatever, then please not tell me. But their states, they could come an update on that state can come from two different people, two different roles in the supply chain. It's from the maintainer themselves, or from somebody who works on behalf of the ecosystem where they publish. So someone in the PyPy community knows something about what is being uploaded and who uploads it, or if an upload seems to be risky in some sort, or if there has not been an upload for a good while, or if mail that is being sent as a response to an upload bounces. Stuff like that is useful information to share, either, first of all, if it's upstream, it can trigger them to reach out to the developer. But if it turns out that the domain name has been hijacked, where the mail used to go, and that was the only way to reach them, then it's useful to signal to the downstream users that the maintainer is unavailable for some reason. So that means there are two roles, two specific parties involved in the supply chain that should be able to authoritatively, in some sense, say something about any given project. So that means, and here comes my ignorance about the details of CycloneDX. I don't know if that's even possible to do in a sensible way within CycloneDX, and maybe that isn't something that needs to be explored a little bit, or so that we don't ask the core implementers to do something that is impossible or too difficult. So that's a couple more.
Yeah, just real briefly on that point.
Yeah.
We typically, how we work in these feature working groups is we code live, which is one of the reasons why it doesn't take us 5 years to create an industry standard, right? So we actually do the prototyping, we do them live, we do the schemas, we do those live, typically JSON, and then we port to XML. One of the obvious benefits of that is that you get true collaboration and talk about peer reviews. So it's really, we're able to catch a lot of things in doing that. But I think we need to figure out, like, what parts of CLE, like, we want to capture in a summary type form, right? Is kind of how I'm envisioning it, as kind of being a summary, and CLE is actually the entire thing, all the events that have transpired. That's kind of how I have it in my mind anyway. Jan, you had your hand up.
I'll wait. Just go on, please.
Oh, okay. Salva?
Yeah, okay, so awesome. So please, if you have any thoughts on that addresses some of this that can be placed in the framing points there, or the deliverance points or whatever, then I'm happy to let someone else write. I don't know how this usually goes. Is this an open document, or do we use the commenting features in Google Docs, or should we have separate sessions on this, or do it at the meetings, or do we prepare anything between meetings?
Yeah, no, we work on these docs during the meetings asynchronously as well. And a lot of the content in these things will ultimately end up being useful on the website, as well as our authoritative guides, right? We've got multiple authoritative guides for CycloneDX. A lot of times, the things that we come up with, especially the use cases, are essentially the foundations for what we use in the authoritative guides. I've got to step away real quick just to answer the door, but continue.
Maybe I
All
could
right.
just use the time to ask my question. So you just described several use cases already. The one with the PyPI, knowing stuff that nobody else knows and such things. Maybe you could paraphrase them somehow and add them to the document we are currently seeing. I mean, the
Yes.
use cases are currently just placeholders to be filled. And just as Steve just described, these use cases are the foundation of our current work and describe the goals and are the first thing we need to discuss as in a way that we describe, or we could set our scope or out of scope definitions. Well, yes, that's a use case, but not for us or and such. But to do that, we do need to have a clear vision of those things. So
Yeah.
this is probably the first thing we do here in this meeting, or in the next 2 or 3 of them. And after that, we could start defining models or gathering ideas how things could be modeled, and identify which data is actually fact-based and which one is just speculative, and all these things. It all comes from those use cases, I guess.
Yeah. One question. Further down the document, it says requirements. Which role do the requirements play in this document?
Oh, Steve,
I
you
guess
are
I'm on
mute.
mute. Sorry. We're the ones that create them. So once we have the use cases, well, what does the spec need to do in order to meet said requirements?
Right.
That way we know, like Jan and I, we know from a core working group perspective what we need to do technically to actually make that happen. And then once we have an idea, we'll live code it.
All right, cool. Now we have 10 minutes left of the meeting. Would it be okay if I share something with you guys that I've been working on that I hope can help us a little bit?
Absolutely.
Let's see if I can find a browser that actually...
While he's doing that, Steve, I think there's 2 things missing off that document that we should probably have. One is a glossary section. So if we come up with some unique form of terminology, and the other one is a parking lot.
Yeah.
Obviously, all these people have good experience and ideas, and we may not want to miss something that somebody comes up with, but may not want to address it immediately. So we should have a parking lot area as well.
Okay, give me a moment. I needed to restart my browser here. So at the CPAN security group, I've been trying to make an effort in understanding or mapping out what an open source supply chain looks like. And all the different possible ecosystems or environments involved, what kind of roles you can find in each of these environments, what kind of metadata each role cares about, either for updating or verifying or assembling or even censoring if that's necessary, and which fields are also mentioned in some of the NTIA or CISA or Cyber Resilience Act documents as fields that are required, or fields that are required by the specification itself. This document, let's see if I can find it now. I'll share with you the screen now. My browser seems to be working. There we have it. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, so in the documents and guides section, we have a reading list, a glossary, and the file that I just described, supply chain SBOM roles and metadata overview. So to quickly look at those. So here I'm actually trying to write some drawings, draw some diagrams. This is like the basic open source ecosystem with a maintainer that publishes something on a GitHub or just uses it as a collaboration platform. And from there, you get something into the language ecosystem, which would be the CPAN or the PyPy or the whatever. And from there, it might be made into a package that is distributed through a Linux distribution, for example. And they might be upstream or downstream of themselves also. And all of these three sources can be used by somebody, a business, an integrator, to put together and create an application from that is placed, put into a production server somewhere or on a device or whatever. And the colors I have here is meant to be an indication for what kind of activity each of these are expected to do. And it's still a work in progress. I'm happy to have discussion around that if somebody feels you have an idea around that. I want to contribute. And if we add the Cyber Resilience Act into the mix, we get a few more extra fields here. An attestation authority, that is the official organization that attests a release of a component. The open source software steward that manages this and makes sure that the due diligence happens on behalf of the manufacturer, who then has some auditors or an importer or distributor downstream that checks that they are all actually also complying with the law. And all this is nice and fine until we start looking at the actual details. There's a lot of people involved and a lot of roles that care about some metadata. And up here we have a maintainer. They might be packaging something on behalf of the language community or something else. They might be, if they publish on CPAN, for example, somebody ensures that they are allowed to publish on a specific namespace. They get assigned, they know about the download URL, and they might have several pipelines. Like in the CPAN world, we have something called backpan, which is all the published CPAN modules. Or the distributions, and the regular CPAN only contains the most recent subset of that, so you don't need to care about the oldest stuff, but it's still available for those who are forced to live with legacy systems or very old servers that they haven't managed to upgrade. And it still needs to work. And going further down, I'm trying to explore each of these also. What kind of fields they care about. say, for example, a manufacturer, that meaning somebody who does business, they need to have a supplier name. They might have a CE. The CE mark is being introduced with the Cyber Resilience Act for software, introduced for software, so that's a new thing. But also a lot of other things that is useful to know about, and where it is demanded that a field is present. SBOM location is not required, but mentioned in the Cyber Resilience Act in Annex 2, I think it is. No, yes, Annex 2. And at the bottom here, we have some references, some to-do lists, and I've tried to also figure out which fields each of these which CycloneDX fields are this correspond to, and the same goes with SPDX 2.3, and when I found it SPDX 3. So this is not done, of course. This is still a work in progress, and hopefully will be useful. But my point in showing you this stuff here is that if we're going to be able to make something that involves several of the steps here, or roles involved in language ecosystems, we need to have a sensible vocabulary. The glossary suddenly becomes super important, but in order to have a meaningful glossary, we need to know what's actually used of terms out there, and who uses it, and which fields are required around each of these terms. So the glossary is a companion piece with this. We are trying to start the work on figuring out what the different terms, how they're used out there, and when there's something I think is unclear or something. Of course, this is an opinionated glossary, but I'm happy to let anybody use this, and also use this as an inspiration for anything that we choose to publish in this forum. If that's okay for you guys. But what does the component mean, for example? There's dependencies. There's a lot of type of nuances around dependencies that people don't talk about. Lots of people say that there's a dependency, but this is a dependency that is unresolved, meaning it's a requirement. Or is it a resolved dependency? And when was it resolved? During deploy, or during build, or during configuration? Or was it is it an assumed or implied dependency because people just assume this will run on a Unix system, so that the tool will always be there, or a directory or something? Or it could be included or embedded, and each of these create different requirements, and gives different effects on what's going on there. And for me, the reason I'm sharing this with you guys is that this is the landscape that we're going to have to make this work in. And there's a lot to get up to read, and I've been putting this together, and I'm literally, this gray hair I have that I got the last year because of reading all this stuff here. I hope this is useful. There's also a reading list here of things I've found. The Cyber Resilience Act is a huge issue also there. So let's go ahead there. I've managed to figure out all the relevant, or whatever I can of the relevant recitals and articles and annexes that are useful for us. Please use this. I'll share the links with you in the document as a potential source, and I'll be certainly using them when it comes to informing me when we discuss going forward. So that's what I wanted to show you guys. I hope this was relevant enough. I think it is at least.
Yep, lots of stuff to go through for sure. We are at time, so thank you everyone for joining. I will get the recording posted up on YouTube later today, and yeah, we'll meet here. We'll meet back here in about 2 weeks' time.
Sweet.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you, Salva. That's a fascinating page. I'm already on it.
Awesome. Feedback is, this is open source. It's published in a Creative Commons license, which means I'm happy to take your contributions and make a conversation out of that. And if you find something wrong, I would really love to know it. And missing, I would also love it. This is I hope this is useful for everyone. It's a work in progress. It's a draft. All right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.